Good evening, everyone. I am hoping. It looks like some of y'all are commenting from Facebook. So I was working on pulling up the event, but was not immediately seeing it here. So there it is. Good. Yeah, I was had a panic moment there. We were doing some work earlier today on the stream stuff and having to do some test driving. So like I have this program that I use and I plug all this stuff into it ahead of time. And so I schedule this event, that's going on right now. But meanwhile, I had to do a different event to test drive some stuff. And so I had this moment where I thought, oh no, what if I forgot to turn all the stuff back on? So looks like we're here. Looks like you guys are here. And I'm glad to see that. Several of y'all already logging on, weighing in, and good to have everybody here. Good to see the Degollados. Hello, Lucille. Yeah, good crowd started. Yeah, so hopefully we got some of you on Facebook. Of course, we should be live on YouTube simultaneously. So anyway, I'm going to get going here. Let me move over to my slide images. Good. Okay. We are continuing this study we're calling The Story of God's People. I believe tonight we're at about the halfway point on the study. And fittingly, we are looking at the time kind of while the Israelites are in exile. I'm going to talk a little bit more, kind of walking us back up to where we are now so we can kind of understand how all these pieces fit together. We're here every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. If you happen to miss a lesson and you want to catch up, you can always hop on our Facebook fan page or on our YouTube channel, and all these things are stored there. The lessons are all available. Just kind of click on the videos tab and scroll through for our King's Crossing Church of Christ page. But appreciate you being here and looking forward to continuing this study with you. I would mention you can, sometimes people will ask, what's the book that we're using? You don't have to have a book in order to participate in this class, but the book we're using is one that I published a few years ago called The Story of God's People. It is published by 21st Century Christian. That is a publisher affiliated with Churches of Christ based in Nashville, Tennessee. And that's their website address there. But if you want a book and you're in Corpus Christi, just come by the church. I've still got a stack of a few extras. I've probably got about 10 or so. So if you would like to pick up a book, $5 a piece, not that expensive, and not that thick either. But would invite you to get a copy of that if you're interested in following along. Next week, there's like a little interlude section. So I have the end of chapter 7. And then before chapter 8 begins, there is a section about the time between the testaments. In total, this is like 400 years of history or so that's going on in that time period. So I'm going to give you a very, very, broad stroke type overview of what was happening in between the Old and New Testaments. And then we'll also be looking at chapter 8 next week, which is where we begin with Jesus's part of the story. So that'll be it for next week, and looking forward to getting into that. For today, we're talking about putting the pieces back together, life in exile. And truthfully, I would say there are some ways that situation is analogous to our pandemic in that there are some things that can kind of go back to being how they were. There are a lot of things that'll probably be permanently different. For the Israelites, even as they're able to get some of their territory back, have some reign again over Jerusalem, we'll talk about that. Even as they get some sense of normalcy, it's not like it was before. It never will be. And so life in exile, they're trying to put things back together after everything else has kind of gone badly. So one question that I would ask, I would invite you to comment on YouTube, comment on Facebook. I will keep an eye on your comments as they're scrolling in. But here's a question that I have. What is a time in your life, I'll say besides COVID, right? This is disorienting to all of us, but what is a time in your life that you were significantly disoriented? Maybe that could have been a tragedy. Maybe it was a planned thing you knew was going to happen that was still a hard experience for you. But what was for you a time of transition that was a hard transition to the point that some of the things you used to take for granted, you had no idea how much you took for granted? A lot of things started over. A lot of things became different. What was a time in your life that was like that? Take your time, make your comments, but I'd like to hear from you on that. What is a time where you were significantly disoriented. Thinking about myself, for me, it's probably been some of my moves across states, going to college in Arkansas. You know, I'm raised in Nashville, Tennessee, but went to college in Searcy, Arkansas. That was a fresh start. And then moving to Corpus Christi. I had no ties down here whatsoever. And so starting over down here, it's been good, but it's also been challenging. And a lot of things you just thought you could assume but can't assume. You know, sometimes the world is different in other places than where you grew up. Thank you for sharing that, Kathy. I bet a lot of people would relate to this one. For you, it was really disruptive, transitioning into being empty nesters. Your whole life is centered around raising your children, taking care of your children, and fortunately, a lot of the time they do grow up and they kind of move out and do their own thing, and it's exactly what you prepared them for, but it's also really hard once that gets here. Wow, I remember standing at the top of my driveway when Trisha pulled away with her car loaded up to move back to Corpus Christi, crying. There's the operative word, right? Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Acknowledging that things are different and this is a new chapter and it won't be the same after this. That's really hard. Thank you for sharing that, Kathy. Interested in hearing from others of you. What was a time in your life that you experienced being significantly disoriented? I wanted to give y'all a brief overview of the biblical story. So if you're just tuning in, we've been working our way. And again, I tried to put the entire story of the Bible into 13 chunks. And right now, tonight, we're on chunk number 7. First chunk was before creation. What is God like? We talked about God as Trinity. We talked about Jesus already being who Jesus is, even before he became flesh and like one of us. From there, we talked about creation and corruption. So we talked about the world being created. We talked about the problem with sin. And we also introduced some of the ones we would call the patriarchs, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is where the story of the Bible goes from taking kind of a grander view of the whole earth to zooming in especially on the family of Abraham, who will dominate the biblical story up until the time that Jesus is resurrected. And it's actually why Abraham's family carries such significance. There was nothing about the Jews that made them morally superior to anyone else, or there just wasn't any real basis for their the kindness that God chose to show to them in selecting them out of all the peoples of the earth. But we see later the reason they're special is because that is the family through whom Jesus would come to the world. So God was always going to preserve that line, protect that line, because that was the family through whom Jesus would come, as he promised to Abraham that all peoples would be blessed through his family. But as Abraham's family kind of moves and settles, eventually they have to go down to Egypt during a famine. While they're in Egypt, they're enslaved. They also grow a lot in number. Eventually, through Moses, God responds and delivers the people out of slavery. And over a course of quite a few years, they're finally able to transition into the land of Canaan. God has a serious conversation with them and says, look, you're not morally superior to these people that I'm driving out of this land so that you can have the land. So once you get the land, don't you go start worshiping all those false gods and chasing after all the stuff those people are chasing after, because I want you to be a holy nation. I want you to be a light to the Gentiles so that everyone can come to you and through you learn about me. So God's thinking like a missionary, and the Jews are mostly thinking about gaining territory. So anyway, over time, they start taking over territory. Eventually, they get better organized. There's the rise of kingship, so they have kings. And from kings and territories, they divide up. Eventually, we looked at last week, the northern half of the kingdom falls in 722 BC, and then the southern part is conquered in 586 BC by the Babylonians. And so that kind of brings us to where we are now. They've lost Jerusalem. The temple's been destroyed. They had the promised land. They lost it all. And they are thoroughly disoriented as a people and as a nation. Let's see. Several of y'all have commented here. Yes. Thank you for sharing this, Adrian. Yeah, she mentions losing a loved one. That is a really tough thing to go through. And I know it's hard too, Adrian, in that it's like people want to be caring, but it's also sometimes people are afraid to say the wrong thing, so maybe they don't express as much love and support as they should or you wish they would, or they kind of overexpress things to the point that you wish they'd say a little less, right? Like it's a hard balance. It's a hard balance to achieve and going through a significant loss. Lucille is mentioning her transition to being a widow. I had the privilege of working with Lucille and her husband Tom in Arkansas. He was a good salt of the earth guy, and as is Lucille, by the way. And Lucille, I know that was a tough one, and thank you for sharing that. Linda mentions moving from California to Japan during my freshman year. They say, Linda, that the hardest cultural move to make is to go from west to east, I believe. Like for us trying to figure out how to function in an Asian culture, man, we just don't look at the world the same way at all. Languages don't have any similarities. Cultures are vastly different. It can be a really hard thing. So yeah, I'm sure that was disorienting. Moving from New Jersey to Texas with my husband and 4 young boys and not knowing another person. I didn't have 4 young boys, but I did move here not knowing another person here, and I relate to that, Jeanette. It can be a daunting thing, especially if you're coming from New Jersey, which, Texas is its own thing. So coming from another state and another background, there's a lot to figure out once you get here. Good. Yeah, thank you all for sharing those. So that was kind of a brief overview of the story that brings us up to where we are. I wanted to highlight what I'm calling some lights in the exile. So it could seem like because we've lost Jerusalem, because we've lost the temple, we don't know how we're supposed to worship anymore. We don't know what we're supposed to do. We don't have the authority. We don't have the freedom to just roam wherever we want now. We're a captured, dominated people. So it'd be easy to think that everything's bleak, and a lot is bleak, but there is also glimmers of hope. One thing that I struggled with in this chapter is I did work in people like the prophet Daniel, but you have several of the minor prophets who kind of fit into this time frame as well. I wanted to at least highlight something mentioned in the book of Lamentations. Lamentations is by Jeremiah. Jeremiah had the really difficult time of preaching to a people that were going to resist his message. God was telling him, you got to preach to them anyway, even though they're not going to listen to you. And so I can't imagine what a frustrating task that must have been. One of my preachers growing up would describe Jeremiah and say he had the kind of situation where every time he preached, his church lost members. So he had a hard ministry, but it was a faithful ministry, right? That's one of the challenging things, is that we want to always kind of have a vision of the kingdom that is onward, upward, more people, more everything. And sometimes maybe the most faithful thing we can do is to continue on even in a period of overall decline, which seems to be the kind of situation we're in our nation, where Christianity, not the cool thing to do anymore. And so not that it was ever totally dominant, but cultural assumptions have shifted incredibly. That's certainly conspicuous over the last year or so. But Lamentations is a book written by Jeremiah, and it's like a sad sandwich, but you get to the middle of it. It's organized in this type of poetry, driving towards the middle. In the middle of Lamentations, where they're saying we have lost absolutely everything, we've been dominated, we've been harmed, we've been wronged. But he gets to the middle section where he says, this I recall, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. So it's this beautiful passage of hope sandwiched in the middle of despair. And that's a lot of what the exile is like. If you were to look at the book of Lamentations and read until you get to that super happy passage in the middle, and then kind of work your way back out of the happy passage through the drudgery, it's to me a good portrait of what some of these biblical people are as we encounter them. So Daniel would be a prime example of someone who was a light in the exile. Daniel and some of his friends are just young men. They're captured. They're taken into Babylonian captivity, and they're not going to just obliterate a people. They want to figure out, who are the smart and talented people, and whatever their wise people know, let's, just like one company buying another company up, we want your technology. We want the things you're good at. They must have assumed that with Solomon's heritage among the Jews, I mean, Solomon had an incredible reputation. They must have wanted to have access to some of the wisdom literature and things that Jews would have had ready access to. And so there's all these stories about Daniel and his friends refusing to cave to the pressure to, worship idols is one of the first things. There's a gigantic statue, and they're all told they're supposed to bow down to this statue. And Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, say, absolutely no way we're going to do that. And so they took them to a furnace. They made the furnace 7 times hotter than it was, kind of representative of the king's anger with them. And even the people throwing them into the furnace died in the process. But they go into the furnace, and there's 3 friends, but as they look in to see them, they should be burning. But not only are they not burning, there's a 4th person with them. So there's that, the angel of the Lord, the pre-incarnate Christ, something. God has sent someone to their aid. And so when they come out, not a hair on their head has been singed. They weren't burned. They weren't burned up in the middle of the trial. God protected them. And so what a message of encouragement that must have been, that there's no reason we survived this, but not only did we barely survive, we're flourishing. We're doing great, and nothing affected us. Another question to ask you about, I asked y'all to share some of your struggles. It doesn't have to be related to the first thing you posted about, but has your faith ever been rewarded? Is there a time that it was hard for you to trust God, to do the right thing, but you did it anyway, and later on something really good came from it? I'm just curious. When you have been faithful to God, what is a way that your faith has been rewarded? Really hard in the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and also in the case of Daniel. Similar to that first situation, there's a king who his other advisors don't like Daniel. All the Babylonian, Persian people, they want to be their own wise guys. Daniel can interpret dreams better than anyone. He can solve riddles no one else can understand. Daniel is just head and shoulders way better than any of the other advisors that the king has. And so they want to get rid of him. And they came up with this brilliant plan where if the king signs an order in a certain way, it is irrevocable. And they convinced him to sign this order. They thought the only way we can get at Daniel has got to be through his religious practices, because he will not compromise them. And so they knew that he was 3 times a day looking out his window, praying, facing Jerusalem. And so they said, for a certain period of time, the only person you can pray to is the king himself, because they wanted the king to be treated like deity. And so the king foolishly signs this order, blasphemously, I should say, and Daniel goes right on praying exactly the way he always did, right there in his window where anybody can see him. Daniel's not doing it. And so the king, when they bring this to his attention, is devastated because he loves Daniel. He's his most trusted advisor. And so by his own order, he has to have Daniel put in this lion's den. And so he can't sleep all night. He's miserable, wondering what has become of Daniel. But in the morning, he calls in there, and Daniel's doing just fine. God sent some help and stopped the mouths of the lions from eating him, harming him, and he's completely fine. And instead, the people who tried to pull this stunt ended up getting themselves in trouble. So you got to be very careful when we scheme and try to get at people. It often doesn't end well, does it? God is the one who settles the score. Daniel also has these incredible visions. I would say that when you look at the stuff in Daniel, you'd be hard pressed to find any other section of scripture or, goodness, one of the big distinguishing marks of Christianity, as kind of an extension of Judaism, is that you don't have any other world religions that have predictive prophecy. I mean, they just don't. They can't tell the future before it happens. In Daniel, you have a vast amount of human history that is described. You have see these different visions. There's one with a group of different animals with characteristics representing world empires. There's this one depicted here of this massive statue, head of gold representing Babylon, breast of silver representing Persia, thighs of brass representing Greece, and then legs of iron representing Rome, and then the divided nations, kind of the iron and clay feet. So all of these world empires represented in Daniel, and then there is this destroying rock that comes flying out of heaven that smashes the statue, and we of course look to that as a pre-image of Christ, the rock coming down to break up the world's kingdoms and establish his own kingdom. So I'd like to think that part of why God gives Daniel such incredibly vivid visions is because it's a rough time. So God doesn't abandon us in our hopelessness. God gives us new reasons for hope. And Daniel got to be on the front row seat of some really cool stuff. In fact, Jesus' own favorite term for himself comes, I believe, from the book of Daniel, where Daniel chapter 7, he has a vision of one, he says, one like a son of man riding on the clouds of heaven. So that term son of man Jesus invokes harkens back to Daniel's imagery. Daniel 12 is the first most, I'll say, most detailed view of the judgment day that we find in Scripture. God reveals this to him, where people are separated, rewarded according to their deeds, or punished according to their deeds. Jesus will expound on that in Matthew 25, but Daniel is the first one to really talk about that in the level of detail that he does. Not that no other prophets had some vision of the end, but Daniel's has a lot, with Daniel, you're kind of going to HD vision at that point, right? It gets a lot clearer. There's also Esther. As I was thinking through some of the stories we could mention in this class tonight, one of the things that was amazing to me is just pondering how some of the best stories in Scripture come from this miserable time period of captivity, where you want to say it's so awful that had to happen, but look how God used it to change his people and to raise up some real heroes in the faith. Esther won a beauty contest. She was beautiful. The king happened to have an advisor who really had it in for the Jews, and so she had to get up the courage to approach the king when there was already a really bad precedent where the former queen got let go for being kind of mouthy and disrespectful and refusing to do what the king wanted her to do. So, all his buddies are warning him about not getting him another one of those uppity women that gets an attitude. And so for her to approach him with a favor unsummoned, it could mean death for her if he didn't extend his scepter. And if you know the story, fortunately he did, but she spent like 3 days praying and fasting before she did this, just hoping he would receive her well. And there's this great conversation she has with her uncle, who's a wonderful, faithful guy. And he says, make no mistake, God is going to raise up our deliverance from somewhere. So if it's not you, it'll be from somewhere else. God's not going to abandon us. But he says, for you, think of where you are. Look who you have access to. Maybe it's for such a time as this that you've been placed where you are. Boy, that's a great thing to hang on to in life, isn't it? When things are difficult, or all of a sudden you see these factors kind of coming together around you and you say, could it really be? Surely not me, but I think her uncle would tell you, maybe it's you for such a time as this. You're the right person with the right skills in the right place at the right time because God's up to something. That's an encouraging message in the middle of this. Let's see here. The form of the fourth is like the Son of God. In that passage, I would assume, Cheryl, that I'd have to look and see if the article appears or not before the word Son of God, but that would be a typical term, just like in Genesis chapter 6, the first 3 verses mentions the sons of God and the daughters of men. That seems to be a term for heavenly beings, the sons of God, so they're seeing one like a heavenly being in that passage. The central theme of Esther, you have been placed here for just this reason. That's right. Okay, let's keep moving here. Actually, man, we're moving super fast tonight. Yeah, okay, I'm going to probably get through this a little early. So I've been asking you about hard times. What has been a light in your hard times? What is something that has brightened your way? What's interesting for me is I am, I've been a Christian for a really long time. And a lot of times in our marriage, if something starts going badly, like the situation we're in, or something tragic happens, I'm actually the one who's kind of gloom and doom and has a hard time seeing the upside to this. Why did this happen? I can't justify it. I'm not okay with it. Um, I have a hard time with it. Carolina's a lot better than I am at seeing a silver lining, or, yeah, but don't forget that this happened in this way, and it could have been way worse if it had been this other thing we thought it might be. And so a lot of times I've found that God has been good to us in that even when bad things have happened, if I pull back and consider it, a lot of times that bad thing I received might have been the best possible version of that bad thing, if that makes sense. Where, you lost the person, but surrounding that loss, maybe you got to spend some great time with them. You got to have some closure. You got to make some good memories just before it happened. There's a lot of different ways that God can provide some light to you in your hard times. But I'm curious, what for you has been a light in your hard times? Yes, Haman getting his just reward. What a great story, Brenda. I mean, when Haman gets it, the Jews loved telling and retelling that story. In fact, a big part of the feast of the celebration of Purim was them reenacting this story. And man, they just love it, hoop and holler when Haman finally gets it, because he is the ultimate villain toward the Jews. He wants them wiped out, and God delivers them, and he ends up really, really embarrassed in the way that he goes. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, you were referencing the New King James. Footnotes does mention that may be read as a son of God. Yeah, and that is how I would take it, Randall, is that they see it as a heavenly being, riding on the clouds. And so the Son of Man, one like a Son of Man. I was not assuming that the article "the" appeared before Son of Man. Thank you for that. Wow, this is tough. Yeah, when our mother was in hospice but came home to pass away, we were able to spend some really good time with her and each other. And Brenda, I'm sure you wouldn't take anything for that time that you got. And I know I could share a similar story about some heavy losses that we've gone through. And you're exactly right. There have been many times where I've known situations like that where, again, loss is not what you want, but there are some ways in which God was good to you in the middle of your loss that, you got to say some goodbyes. You got some time together. You got to be at home, peacefully. That's all good. Thank you for sharing that. So again, if you have any other comments, I'd like to hear them. What has been a light for you in your hard times? In the exile, again, there's so many different things we can talk about from this time period. Under Persian rule, one exciting thing is that Cyrus, who is a Persian king, Cyrus feels compelled to help the Jews. The Persians are different than the Babylonians or the Assyrians. The Assyrians, everything's just a total bloodbath. The Babylonians were not kind, but a little easier. But the Persians, they were like, hey, you got your religious centers. I mean, we want you to pay tribute, but we want you to have, you can go back to your own place. You can enjoy it. He agrees to provide resources so they can do some rebuilding. And that's a huge thing. He's moved to help them. Ezra and Nehemiah work together on this. And in fact, it seems that Ezra and Nehemiah definitely need to be read together. But Ezra is the priest who is trying to teach people how to be faithful to God. It's fascinating because they've been so scattered. Man, it's just like the effects of COVID. You get so scattered, you get out of all the habits of church going and all this stuff where it's easy to just kind of, like, it's amazing how quickly you can forget a lot of this stuff or detach from this stuff or just kind of forget what it's like to be with other Christians or to be challenged or whatever it is that your church experience does for you. But Ezra is having to teach all these people a lot from scratch because it's not like they all had pocket Bibles to carry around with them. It was really hard to have access to the Word of God when you're scattered and you can't go to any of the places where you would be taught the Word of God. So Ezra has this important religious function and also trying to inspire people. I could mention minor prophets like Malachi. have a big part to do in some of this as well, where they're urging the people to finish the tasks. Nehemiah had been the cupbearer to the king. He hears about the people trying to rebuild Jerusalem and the walls, and it just pricks his heart. He asks for permission, he asks for resources, and he is able to go and to help. And so it's this amazing time period where everything had to have been so stressful, because it says they literally would work with one hand while holding their sword for battle in the other. All the neighboring people did not want them to get their city back, did not want them to get their territory back. And so it's like they were trying to build while they were defending themselves. And it was very dangerous, but just the same, they acted quickly, they moved quickly, they were able to rebuild the wall of the city. They were able to lay the foundation of the temple, which was a significant moment. I wanted to bring this passage up. To me, it's just, I don't quite know what to do with it, but I'm just fascinated by it. Remember, they've not been in captivity all that long. There are people alive who would remember being taken into captivity, who had grown up in the southern kingdom at the time that the Babylonian Empire is out of the way and the Persian Empire is now, in power. So people like Daniel were still living at this point. And so this is what happens. It says, when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests took their places to praise the Lord. With praise and thanksgiving, they sang to the Lord. He is good. His love toward Israel endures forever. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. This is real progress. We're going to get there. But this is interesting. Many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. None could distinguish the sounds of the shouts from the joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise and the sound was heard far away. So what's going on here? You have some people who say, this is so great. We haven't been abandoned. God has heard us. God is bringing us back home again. We're going to rebuild it. We've got the foundation done. This is a great celebration. And then you have the older folks who remember the old temple, and it was way better than this new temple we're building. And so while the others are celebrating, the older folks are weeping because how inferior they believe this temple is to the old one. I'm interested if you have any thoughts on exactly what to do with that. There's something to be said for missing out on the present actions of God because we're too busy pining for the good old days when everything was the way we liked it and it was easy and the way that it used to be, and it's not like that anymore. I mean, you can sit around and bellyache on that stuff. It doesn't fix anything. But this dynamic of learning to be joyful about what God is doing in the present, even if it's different than some of what we've experienced in the past. And it wasn't going to be the case that they ever regained the influence they had back when, Solomon's temple was in place. But that was destroyed, and let's be honest, also by their own hand, by their own actions, that they were driven out and all that happened. So, interested if you have any comments on that. But that to me is a pretty fascinating part of Scripture, where some of the old folks still remembered what it was like. And, you got a lot of respect for them, but also, hey, at least we're doing something. We got something back. All right. So, man, it looks like we're going to wrap up a little early tonight, and that's fine. So use the Church Center app to connect. One of the things I'm going to do in this book, there was not, I've only got, I think it's an 88-page book. They did not have room for a supplement that I created, but I made a PDF supplement that I am intending to send you soon. And what that supplement will do is that it will give you a breakdown of every book of the Bible. And if you're trying to understand that book of the Bible, it'll tell you like which chapter from this book that part of the Bible fits in with. And so I'm going to try to send that to all of you as a PDF that you can use as an additional reference. So, you're getting ready to study the book of Nehemiah, or you're going to study Exodus, or you're going to study 1 Timothy, and you're saying, well, how do I make sense of this book in its context? I'm going to provide you with that list, and then you could read the appropriate chapter in this book and maybe get some sense of where all that's supposed to go. If you want to get that email, would love to have you use the Church Center app. It looks just like that icon on the screen. Download Church Center. It's pretty easy to locate our church there. And we've got several things in play there. We're going to be adding more as we go, but use that Church Center app to connect. And again, we are here Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Something else that I will mention, cross your fingers, but as of today, the people that I've been working with to make these upgrades to our audiovisual system, my original goal for live streaming was to have this up and running by Thanksgiving. And so that I'm still fooling with this tells you what kind of a road this has been. But as of today, we did a test drive on some of the elements, and it's working. And so the timing couldn't be worse in terms of my volunteers, because most of our volunteers are either going to be at camp or going to be out of town. So I've got to get people trained on this stuff so we can actually start using it. So it still may be, 2-3 more weeks of watching the worship service from the previous Sunday, which is what we've been having to do up to this point. But coming very, very soon, we hope to be finishing that out. And we will probably do some sort of a test drive, and it may be a Wednesday night. On Wednesday nights, we have a singing group that meets at church, and I need to get some people to help me test out various microphones in various parts of the auditorium. And so it may be the case that we take a week off from class in about another 2 or 3 weeks. I'll give you a heads up ahead of time so that we can do a full test drive before we go live with it. It is my intention this coming Sunday that I can't be in the booth when I'm up there preaching, obviously, but during Buck's class, my intention is that this Sunday I am going to try and live stream Buck's class, and that way I'll have a chance to kind of mess around with the audio and the video and just see how it goes. So it may not work well, but it's going to be a good chance to try something out. And so this Sunday, if you're still using only our online presence, it'll be the normal video. I've already uploaded it. It's ready for Sunday for worship. But if you stick around, we will try to have Bible class for this Sunday and see how it goes. And again, it'll be an actual live stream, and we'll see what happens. But keep that in mind. Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Adrian. Yeah, and I appreciated your comments. Like when people watch and tell you how it's going, that's actually super helpful. One of the hardest things about this live stream stuff is that you've got one audio mix coming out of the speakers in the room. There's a second audio mix totally detached from that one that's going to the live stream. So we have a set of headphones we listen to try and get that live stream sound balanced. And one of the biggest things about this that I'm really hoping we can get fine-tuned is that we have now added microphones to the right and left of the stage. They're very subtle, but these are ambient crowd mics. And so now when you hear congregational singing in the live stream, it will actually be our church. And if you're watching it on your TV at home and you got like a surround system soundbar type setup, it will actually be in stereo. And so, if there's a particularly good soprano on the right or the left, you might be able to pick them out of the crowd. So we're looking forward to that. And I appreciate everybody's feedback. So thank you for weighing in on that today, Adrian. Well, it's been a good night. And I'm wrapping up a little early tonight, but that's okay. We will look forward to seeing you again next week. Be praying for all of our people getting ready to go to Bible camp. That's this coming weekend. I know there's a lot of prayer, a lot of preparation, a lot of exciting stuff going on there. Also, if you haven't had the chance yet to meet our summer intern, Taylor's doing a really great job. Glad to have her here. And it's been a good summer so far. So hope to see you all soon, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here.